Clear prop.
Star 73 is Yankee number 2 following twin traffic, 3 mile final, clear Sutton. 1 Charlie Bravo, exit in runway 25, going 4 mile final.
This is Behind the Prop with United Flight Systems owner and licensed pilot Bobby Doss and his co-host, Major Airline Captain and designated pilot examiner Wally Mulhern. Now let's go Behind the Prop.
What's up, Wally?
Hey, Bobby, how are you?
I am fantastic. This week we're going to take on a technical subject. We haven't done this in a while. We've kind of done some interviews. We've done some topics on weather and night flying and those sorts of things. But this week we're going to take on a technical topic that you deal with almost on a daily basis, probably a daily basis between check rides and your flying career, and that's weight and balance. Today is all about weight and balance. How many weight and balance calculations do you review on a weekly basis?
Quite a few, especially check rides. I'm looking at the private pilot ACS right here, and under pre-flight preparation, one of the skills elements is it says the applicant demonstrates the ability to compute the weight and balance, correct out of center of gravity loading errors, and determine if the weight and balance remains within limits during all phases of flight. So I'm going to give the applicant a scenario to where they have to kind of recalculate things, whether it's we're going to remove something or add something or shift something around in the airplane, and I'm going to look to see that they have the ability to correct it if we're out of balance, what we can do.
What's the sentiment? I'm sure everyone listening cares. What's the sentiment of DPEs on having it done handwritten in a table or in Excel or in ForeFlight or from the POH? So I got to take a picture and use their table from their example. What is the sentiment? What are you expecting from an applicant as it relates to calculating that weight and balance?
Oh, I all of the above are fine, just as long as they understand. There's some concepts with weight and balance that some people are a little bit maybe not as knowledgeable as they should be, in my opinion. For instance, again, the vast majority of our people that are being trained are flying in usually 172s or single-engine Pipers. And, after you do a couple of weight and balance, you realize that full fuel and the two of you and your instructor, fit in the airplane, and weight and balance is not an issue. So you kind of have a mindset that two people in the front seat of a single-engine airplane and full fuel is never an issue, and that's just not the case. I mean, I in my Saratoga, if myself and another 200-pound individual were in the front seat with full fuel, we would be out of the forward limits of our center of gravity. So if I'm ever in a situation like that, either A, we can't go with full fuel, which we can go with 70 gallons rather than 102 gallons. That usually works. Or I need to have some weight in the back of the airplane. And, then you have to figure out, well, boy, if we're going from point A to point B to pick up people to bring them back to point A, and I throw an extra 150 pounds in the back of the airplane, how's that going to affect my takeoff from point B coming back? So, there's some things that you need to work out.
That sounds like a commercial check ride there, Wally, where I got to go pick people up and drop something off and make sure I'm doing everything right. Gives me flashbacks to that day.
Yeah.
But it's the real world. And,
it is.
And as you mentioned, we all sit around fly schools and trainers and doing some time building together. It's 92% of the time just two of us in the aircraft. And we get a little bit used to the fact that full tanks and two average-sized people are probably just fine. But the real world happens once we start doing some real flying, and we take our family places, and now we get the third and fourth passenger, and people seem to be somewhat confused and scrambling on trying to calculate that stuff.
Yeah.
And the way of the future, we talk about it a lot, is electronics, right? We're going to I think a spreadsheet was the creme de la creme 5 years ago, and pretty much everyone that flies now probably has their profiled aircraft in ForeFlight or their electronic flight bag, and they're probably putting it into that tool and then using that tool to say pilot is X, co-pilot is Y, backseat has X, luggage compartment has this much. And then what the beauty of ForeFlight is the multiple fuel settings that I can have, right? So I can have full fuel to the tabs, dipstick it at 10 gallons a side if I want to, whatever. I can understand exactly the fuel loads that I have and have multiple of them in ForeFlight or any electronic flight bag for that matter.
Yeah.
Which really makes it easy for me to know where I need to be.
Yeah.
But I need to make sure that all those things add up to the right numbers, and that I'm in balance, and that I have the right takeoff loads. For me, in the 182 that I fly more often than not, there is a max ramp weight, a max takeoff weight, and a max landing weight. And I assume in an emergency I'm going to land no matter what, of course, but I have to be cognizant of that additional 300 pounds that I have to burn off before I land.
Right.
That's a lot of flying if I'm going to take off with max takeoff weight and then land somewhere and not, that's 50 gallons of fuel that I got to get rid of, right?
Yeah.
It's not a short trip. It's not a really long trip, but it's not a short trip either.
Yeah. Yeah, and one thing I will ask on checks, I'll say what's the max takeoff weight of our airplane, and I'm really a little bit surprised that it's just not on the tip of the tongue for most people. They can't tell me it's 2,300 pounds or 2,550 or whatever it may be, and so they pull out the POH and start looking for it, and a lot of times they're looking for it just written down in text format, which it probably is somewhere. But if you just go to the weight and balance section and you find the graphic depiction of the envelope, if you look at the top line, usually the weight goes up and down, and the CG is on the bottom, the x-axis, if you will. If you just look at the very top of the chart and find out what the weight is up there, that is in all likelihood the max gross takeoff weight of your airplane. And when I teach, I say, it is called weight and balance. Okay, it's actually two problems, and I think we would all agree that the weight element of it is nothing more than addition and subtraction. Now, when we get into the balance, we have the arm, the weight times the arm equals the moment, and all that kind of stuff. But just calculate the weight portion first, because if you don't meet the weight limitations, well, we can't go anyway. All right, so fix the weight first, and then look at the balance. And again, the weight is just adding things up. If you know what the weight of the airplane is, it weighs. Let's just make nice round numbers. Let's say we have an airplane that weighs 1,500 pounds is the empty weight of the airplane. And then we've got two people who each weigh 200 pounds. Okay, now we're up to 1,900 pounds. And we have 50 gallons of fuel, which is 300 pounds, 50 times 6. So now we're at 2,200 pounds. And we've got 400 pounds worth of baggage or freight, luggage, whatever. We're at 2,600 pounds. Well, we can't go. We are 100 pounds overweight. So it doesn't even matter where that the center of gravity is, because we're too heavy. So we need to make some adjustments before we even get into figuring out the balance portion.
So you don't take the pilot out, though. You take other things out of the aircraft.
Exactly. And 400 pounds is a lot of stuff. I'm not sure in that scenario what you'd be taking with you, but get rid of 100 pounds worth of bricks or whatever, and then do the balance portion. But you need to be familiar with your airplane, and when you enter your stuff in your electronic flight bag, ForeFlight, whatever. The old saying of garbage in, garbage out. If you put wrong data in there, obviously you're going to get wrong weight and balance information. So don't just trust your calculations. When you enter that data, you need to go in and do some manual weight and balance scenarios, and then do some on your EFB and make sure they come out the same.
Yeah, you surely wouldn't want to just copy someone else's rendition, right?
Right.
Imagine we all have played the game Pass the Word, I'm assuming, in elementary school, and it never works out.
Right.
If I let you borrow my data from my entry of my 182, and then someone borrowed your data from your entry of the 182, and then someone did that for their 182, that's not the same numbers, right? It might be a really close POH.
Right.
We just talked about one of our students who bought a 182 and was talking about the difference in landing characteristics, and I'm like, that's odd to me that your 182 from 2004 would be just that much different than my 182 from 2004. And he goes, oh, don't forget I have an air conditioner. And I was like, oh, he goes, it's only 60 pounds. And I'm like, well, 60 pounds, if you think in the grand scheme of things, useful load in a 182 is 1,100 pounds. A lot of that's fuel, half that's fuel, or a third of that's fuel. 60 pounds is a good chunk of that remaining. That's 6%, 7% of the remaining amount, maybe. That's a lot of weight.
Right.
So put all that in the back of the plane where his is installed. That's going to make that plane land a little bit different than one that doesn't have that. So I surely wouldn't want to copy my numbers into his flight bag and then him use it and forget about that 60 pounds, because that could really hurt somebody.
Yeah, and that's an excellent point to think about. Summertime around here, everybody's saying, "Oh boy, I wish we had an airplane with air conditioning," and it's something to think about. If you're ever considering adding air conditioning, you're going to add weight, which is going to take away from your payload, and you need to factor that in. I know in my 172, I have a which is kind of cool. The useful load of my 172 is 777, and that just happens to be the airplane I'm going to training on in just a few days. But I know my useful load is 777 pounds, and with 40 pounds of usable fuel, that's 240. So you subtract that from 777, and you get 537 pounds of stuff, people and luggage. So if you have, can you put 3 people in the airplane with full fuel? Well, you gotta figure out what the weight of the 3 people are.
Probably not with me in it. I need to lose some weight, Wally.
Right.
Just
hold your breath. Just hold your breath. That works, right?
Where does all this information come from? So hopefully we got some trained pilots out there, but for those new pilots that are listening, I would first pull out a POH to get all the information, probably use their numbers, their sample problems to practice. It's in the section 6 of any newer style POHs, should be in section 6 of the POH, weight and balance. And then obviously you need the weight and balance of the aircraft. Where does that come from, Wally? When the plane comes from the factory, it's got a weight and balance in the POH, but what do you think the current weight and balance, what do you think the most recent weight and balance came from for your aircraft?
Yeah, well, in my airplane, it's actually in the maintenance logs, and then we put a little revision in the POH that tells what the actual numbers are, because anytime you add something from a maintenance standpoint and add an equipment or take away anything, or technically if you take off one piece of equipment and add a new one, you need to figure out what the weight difference are, because just because you took out an altimeter and put in a new altimeter, it doesn't necessarily mean they're the same weight. They could be a half a pound different, and you really should be calculated into the new weight and balance of the airplane.
So there's times where we might weigh a plane, actually putting it on scales and having it weighed, which would then someone who's, I guess, certified or trained to do that would tell the weight amounts and the stations that they're in and the balance of that aircraft in its current state. There's also calculated weight and balances, which is what you're referring to, where we might remove something somewhat inconsequential and replace it with something that's inconsequential. And And I'm sure at some point, if you did that 10 or 20 times, you would probably want to put that plane back on scales.
Yeah.
Kind of my rule of thumb, we have 14 aircraft in this fleet here. And if I was going to buy another aircraft or put another aircraft on the line, I would want to weigh it. I think it's a great time to spend a few $100 and make sure that you have a new crisp on the scales weight. But if we were to change, just recently, we had Mike Bush on the show a while back. He talked me into buying some engine monitors. I put those engine monitors in, which means we got rid of a lot of small pieces of equipment in that cockpit. The tachometer went away, the fuel gauges went away, and really my mechanic just weighed all that stuff on a desktop scale and took that weight out from that station and then put the engine monitor in that station and did a calculated weight and balance, which is the most recent weight and balance on that aircraft. And it is what you would need to use if you were going to calculate the weight and balance for a check ride with Wally. Because you would use the POH numbers for max and empty weight, and then you would take this new weight and balance that the mechanic calculated and put it on there. When else might you weigh a plane, Wally, if you hadn't actually weighed a plane?
Well, I think your thought of if you're buying an airplane, it's probably not a bad idea. I've bought a couple airplanes and I have not done that, but that's probably not a bad idea to do that. I know when you buy an airplane, a lot of times they'll say, oh, it'll true out at 150 miles per hour. They're almost always going to give you the airspeed, and first of all, they're going to give you miles per hour because that's higher.
Yeah.
It sounds better. And they're probably going to give you true airspeed rather than indicated. And really what I want to know is what's the indicated airspeed in knots? Okay, 106. Okay, 106 is a lot different from 150.
Yeah.
But same with weight. I mean, obviously, when you buy an airplane, you want something with lots of payload. Okay,
Yep.
because you can put, or useful load, you can put lots of stuff in there, and we can fly a really long time. And it does change over time. But another time to think about is after the airplane's been painted, because you're taking a lot of paint off an airplane, you're putting a lot of paint back on an airplane, and colored paint has more pigment to it, so colored paint weighs a little bit more than white paint.
Yeah, and so if you think about a gallon of paint, I don't know when the last time you picked up a gallon of paint was, but it's not inconsequential.
Right.
You wouldn't put 12 of those in the back baggage compartment and not really know what the weight was you were adding to an aircraft.
Right.
And I'm not sure exactly how many gallons of paint it takes to paint an aircraft. If send us a note via social media. But the net of it is it's a lot more weight than you probably think it is.
Right.
And you would want to do that. But anything else I don't think I would change. I wouldn't feel obligated to go weigh the aircraft unless it was buying it or I was painting it. I might do it in those two instances, for sure. So with that, another place you can find information about weight and balance, the FAA has a free handbook. It's the Weight and Balance Handbook, much like the Pilot Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge. It's out there. It's available for free. It's a pretty beefy book, right? It's 7 or 8 chapters. Talks about commuter airlines, big airlines, talks about ultralight aircraft and how you need to be thoughtful if you're going to fly those type aircraft. But once I pull all this data together and I know how to calculate it, I think there's some big numbers you want to know. Like you said, I'd want to know max weight on any aircraft I was going to fly. And I'd want to know what my weight was in relationship to that max number.
Right.
I'd want to know ramp weight, empty weight, what that payload capability is. As you said, if you had a Cessna, it had an air conditioner in it. Just for giggles, we'll say it had really heavy paint, and all you could do was put 20 gallons in it and 1.5 people. That would not be a very good plane to buy, probably. You're not going to get much out of it. What are you going to do?
Right.
As you said, I'm looking for that 4-digit number, something in the 1,000+ range,
Yeah.
which is like a 182. But what I also find odd is my friends, they go, I can't believe you don't have a 5-seat aircraft. Like, none of your planes have 5 seats. They're all 4-seaters. And I'm like, well, the twin, you could put 6 seats in it, but you can't go anywhere. You're not going to put 6 human beings in there. And they're perplexed. They don't know. They're not pilots. They're from the outside looking in going, well, why not? And there is this, we all learned this early on in our training. There are 4 forces of flight. Something opposes weight. And to create that much lift, these small single twin engine aircraft, light twins, just don't have enough lift to overcome that much weight. And that's what we're doing with all this process and procedure to figure this stuff out. We could probably search the internet and find hundreds of them, but there's been a lot of accidents because of planes that are overweight, right? And you search that on the internet, you'll find a lot of things, videos of planes not getting off the ground, probably some fake stuff out there too. But I can remember early in my training, I saw a video of what it was, either a Warrior, Archer, Bonanza, a low-wing aircraft that's going down the runway. It kind of comes off the ground, goes back on the ground, comes off the ground, goes back on the ground. And I just got to think, that's got to be a freaky feeling if you're overloaded like that and the plane wants to fly, but the wings just can't create enough lift. And in that incident, they end up going off the runway and hitting a berm of some sort. I don't think anybody got really hurt too terribly bad, but they tore up a really nice aircraft for sure. And it's one but it does keep me up at night. I'm afraid people don't do enough to think about what I should do to take things out of the aircraft if I'm overweight. 3 big boys in a 172 ain't going to work. I can assure you. It's just not going to get it done, especially with full fuel. And we talk about, we all know how to put fuel in a plane, I hope. It's the taking fuel out that's probably not as easy for people, or maybe hasn't been taught as much. But I would assume you give calculations on check rides for these type examples.
Yeah, I do. And if you've listened to the show long enough, I like to talk about fuel. And, that's the one thing that this airplane cannot fly without. We need fuel. And you would almost expect that my expectations were that we want to take full fuel all the time. But there's just times where full fuel isn't going to work. And that's when you have to look and you have to say, okay, boy, I am landing with 3 hours of fuel. Is it within my personal minimums to land with 2 hours of fuel? And maybe an hour's worth of fuel is 15 gallons. That's 90 pounds. And if we're 80 pounds overweight, well, boy, we could take off the 15 gallons, and now we're 10 pounds under max takeoff weight. So does the landing with 2 hours of fuel still meet my personal minimums? It may or may not, but if it does,
well, if we were going to go to Conroe today to eat lunch, that's 12 minutes, even if we got diverted, probably. Yeah, a little bit. So we still want to stick to our personal minimums, but. What if we said we want to land with an hour of fuel, no matter what? Hour and 15 minutes of fuel is probably, like you said, 15 gallons in a Cessna 172. We could take a lot of fuel out of those aircraft if we wanted to, and be completely safe to go to Conroe and come back for sure.
And I think something else we don't understand is for the most part we are focused. Again, student pilots are focused on. Forward CG is the best. I want my CG as forward as possible. Well, there are actually advantages to an aft CG. With an aft CG, and now again, I'm not saying out of the limits, but as long as we're within the limits, an aft CG, you are going to get a higher true airspeed. So that airplane is going to fly faster. Higher airspeed equates to a higher ground speed, okay? And better miles per gallon.
You think that's because they've blown all those stalls and they just want the nose to go over so much?
I don't know. I don't know what it is, but we do have advantages to an aft CG, and in fact, that's where the airlines try to get the CG is towards the aft end. And with that in mind, with the airlines, we have a dedicated person who does our load planning, and he's called a load planner, or she. So just to give you an idea, I mean, that's how important it is. Before a flight leaves the ground, I mean, there's hundreds of, well, I won't say hundreds, but there's a lot of people that are involved in the dispatch of that airplane. We have maintenance people taking care of the airplane. We have a dispatcher who's planning our route of flight and our altitude and fuel requirements and all that kind of stuff. But we have a load planner that will tell the ground personnel, okay, we have, we have 3,000 pounds of mail today. That needs to go in the aft cargo bin or the forward cargo bin, depending on the situation. Maybe we don't have a lot of people on board today, so we need to block row 7 through 11, and put everybody toward the back of the airplane. So just the fact that, I mean, there's a dedicated person that figures out how to load a given airplane tells you how important it is.
Yeah, I would think it's obviously critical, and the level of oversight is bigger probably because of the passengers and the rules and regulations around flying people and passengers and payload like that. But we should not take it any lighter just because we're going to take our family on a short hop somewhere. We should do our calculations and make sure it's right. We talked a little bit about balance, and in a twin, it's different. We fly Travel Air at this flight school, which is considered a baby Baron. It's got two 180 horsepower engines. They both rotate the same way, the props do. And to not get into multi-engine training on this one, maybe we'll do a behind the props show soon. It really is about critical engine and the effects that the balance could have on a twin that may give us, unfortunately, the potential to lose control, right?
Yeah.
And again, lots of what you're learning in multi-engine training, you demonstrate and you learn what VMC is and what a critical engine is. And once at low airspeeds, i.e. takeoff, if we lose an engine and we lose the critical engine, we might have some forces that really weight could cause some real problems with, and we could lose rudder control or rudder the ability to use that rudder.
Yeah. Rudder authority.
Rudder authority is the right word. That's from a DPE there. And if I lose that rudder authority, it could be really, really bad for the aircraft and the people in that plane. So we want to think about that. And in my twin that we have at this flight school, we actually have 100 pounds in the nose baggage compartment that's written all over everything so people know it's up there. But it is to help improve some of that center of gravity based on two people in the front seats or two people flying that aircraft during training to make sure that it doesn't get more aft, because that's where we're going to lose the ability to use that rudder.
Yeah. Multi-engine training adds a whole new element. All the factors that are in play with a single-engine airplane are in play with a multi-engine airplane, but now we have some different things. If the airplane gets slow enough and, we could lose the ability to be able to maintain controllability using the rudder. And that's what VMC, that's velocity minimum controllable airspeed. And that's the bulk of your multi-engine training is going to be centered around that whole concept. So weight and balance becomes a little bit more critical in a multi-engine airplane.
No question. What about, we talked before we started recording about a story that you had from your freight days. You want to tell that story to the listeners?
Yeah, I used to fly canceled checks prior to 9/11. That was an industry that existed. Everything's digital now, but there were all kinds of airplanes flying canceled checks all over the country at night. They'd have to go from the local banks to the Federal Reserve Bank. Anyway, I worked for a company, and we did that. I flew from Monroe, Louisiana to New Orleans, back to Monroe to Dallas to Shreveport, and back to Monroe 4 nights a week. And I flew it in a Baron, and our contract that we had, the FBO, called for, and I'm making up the numbers. I'm not sure exactly what they were, but I'm going to say that our contract called for 800 pounds of freight, of canceled checks each night. And typically, when the guy would come out with the bags, we'd have 16 bags. And they'd all be about the same. So 800 divided by 16, it's about 50 pounds per bag. And I would usually help the guy put the bags in the airplane, and I would put as many in the nose of the airplane as I could, and the rest would go on the back of the airplane. And, of course, it was Part 135, so we were required to do a weight and balance every night. And, 50 pounds per bag, right? And I would have to lift them up and put them in the nose compartment, and I just... 50 pounds, that's a lot of weight. And I would kind of struggle with these 50-pound bags, putting them in the nose compartment. And after we did this for a few nights, after I got off work one day, I went over to my parents' house, and their dog needed to go to the vet. And so I offered to take the dog to the vet. And so we go to the vet's office, and we go in, and we go back to the treatment room, and they want them up on the table, and I reach down and I pick them up and I put them up on the table, and the dog weighed 80 pounds. And I looked at that and I went, holy cow, I had absolutely no problem lifting up an 80-pound dog, but I'm struggling with these 50-pound bags every night.
And they're paying by the weight, I'm assuming.
Exactly. It was contracted. Yeah, it was contracted for 800 pounds a night. So as soon as we got the dog all taken care of, I took him back to my parents' house. I went back out to the airport, and I found my boss, and I said, hey, I don't think we are taking 800 pounds of freight every night. I think it's a lot heavier. And so that night he said, okay, we're gonna weigh the bags. And those 50-pound bags were more like 90 pounds. And so I think the next day there was a little renegotiation between us and the freight company.
Well, that's true. We have a scale here that we weigh stuff if people are putting things in the planes, and I struggle every time that there's a female acquaintance going with us and we ask their weight and they give you their weight, and I want to know, male or female, whether they're telling the truth. If they're, if I told you I was 180, you'd probably question that, I hope, Wally. I'm not the 180 anymore that I used to be. And you just got to be honest. You got to know what your bags weigh. I think the more we put into these planes, the things add up. You don't want to get overweight. It would be a very bad outcome for sure. I
know I've gone on many excursions up in Alaska, little float plane excursions here and there. And when you call the book, they always ask you your weight. And then just if you ever do this, just be ready, because when you get there, you're going to have to step on a scale. So it doesn't really do you any good to lie. I mean, we all want to say, 105, 190. Oops, yep. I meant 230. Yeah, it doesn't work. So you're going to get caught.
I just recently went to the doctor for my annual checkup, not medical checkup, my real personal family doctor. And the first thing they do is they take your blood pressure and they put you on the scale, right? And I've got my iPhone and my wallet, and I carry a little flashlight and my keys. And of course, when I get on the scale, I want to take all that out and put it on the seat. So I do that. And then on the scale, I'm still more than I normally am at home, right? When I check it there. And of course, that's the clothes and everything you got on. But I'm thinking, that iPhone and that wallet and that key and all these other smart things I have in my pocket, that's another 5 or 6 pounds. So I just reached down and picked it up, and I was like, the number I put in ForeFlight every time has gone up, because I'm not leaving the phone and the keys and the wallet and everything at the FBO or at the flight school. I have all that with me too. So you need to give an honest weight. You need to know what you really weigh with all that stuff in your pocket, because it's probably different for sure.
And, God forbid if you are in an accident or even an incident, that's one thing that's going to get looked at. They are going to find out, if the airplane is in a not good condition and fuel is possibly leaked out, they're going to look at fuel records, and they're going to find out what that airplane took off with as best they can tell. And, they're going to look at everything on board the airplane. So that will get looked at.
No question. Anything to add before we wrap up?
No, I think that's about it.
All right. As always, and now we'll include this for this show, do your weight and balance, fly safe, and stay behind the prop.
Thanks for checking out the Behind the Prop podcast. Be sure to click subscribe and check us out online at BehindTheProp.com. Behind the Prop is recorded in Houston, Texas. Creator and host is Bobby Doss. Co-host is Wally Mulhern. The show is for entertainment purposes only and is not meant to replace actual flight instruction. Thanks for listening, and remember, fly safe.